All right, so welcome to the first meeting of the SROI service group. This service group is an extension of the data development work group, that overall work group. So it's sort of a subset. So what we discuss here kind of rolls up into the data development work group activities that we have scheduled for the year. This group is dedicated to enhancing the SROI calculator that we launched at the end of last year. It launched with a couple of programs and services and their respective outcomes. We'll take a look at that here in a moment to see where the calculator stands today. And then what this service group is tasked to do. It should be pretty fun. And because we have a lot of examples of how things can and should look, it'll probably be a lot easier to add, especially as we get things moving. So without further ado, I'd like to show a couple of things here. It says it here, but my name is Lawrence Einer. I'm the Director of Training and Technical Assistance for CalCappa, and I generally run this service group. We'll also have participation in this group from some of the other folks that help build the calculator. We'll invite them into our next session after we've had a chance to use this tool that I'll demonstrate. Okay, very good. Without further ado, let me share with you a couple of things. So I've got a side-by-side view of the, there we go, of the calculator on the left. This is at sroi.calcappa.org. You are welcome to check that out on your own machine if you like. I'll put the address here in the chat. So that's what that is. And then on the right is the tool that we'll be using. And I'm going to drop a copy of that in the chat for this session. And then this will be made available in other ways to this service group. Okay, so we'll send this out by email and make it available pretty regularly. But the tool itself is not really intended for public use. This is really the tool that I'm talking about for filling in the calculator. And I'll be specific. Today I'll use the term tool to describe the spreadsheet and the calculator to be the actual program, the calculator and its functionality. Okay. So the input tool is really designed to help add more functionality. So we'll make it available all over the place as we can. So if other folks from the group ask you for a copy, then that's fine. It's a template spreadsheet, and it's not especially sophisticated, okay? But it gets the job done very well for our purposes of adding content to the calculator. All right. So what you see on the left on the calculator is that we start out here with selecting a program, and you see that we've only got two program categories to start with. We've got the employment and training, and then we've got weatherization. And you'll notice on the right in the tool, and hopefully this isn't too tiny, but on the right in the tool, you'll see that we're using this employment and training as an example on the first tab. And you'll notice at the bottom, we're on the instructions tab. So that's an indicator that what you're seeing at the top here is for illustrative purposes only. So you don't want to add to this or change this. Change it won't make a difference. But in this case, this first page won't be for data entry. As we move on to additional tabs, you'll see that there's space to add content. Okay, but we'll discuss what that looks like here in a second. These are all the instructions to do that. All right, but what's important is that this employment and training matches up. So what we're going to be doing here, I'll show you how these items that are in the sample are laid out in the calculator itself, and then how it is that they correlate. So when you want to add things to different parts of the calculator, there are different parts of the tool to enter those items. All right. So pretty basically, if I select the item, I have all of these fields. There's two entry fields that I have. One is a budget. The other is the number of clients that I would have enrolled in that program for the term that I'm looking for here. That term is arbitrary. Generally speaking, you're probably looking at a grant cycle. but you can set that for whatever fits your purposes. We'll say in this case that um, in terms of a budget, and it may be helpful to put some numbers in here in a moment, but in terms of the budget, this is a self-entry. So this is something that you would want to include, but we've identified some of the budgets for specific outcomes or values for particular outcomes. And we'll start seeing when we add outcomes that's when these calculator numbers start to come into play. These first two fields are always user entry. Okay, so it's very specific to the user and the agency. So when I start adding outcomes, that's when you start to see the calculate or the tool come into play. If I pull down this drop down of options, you'll notice that these outcomes, as they're listed here, are the same outcomes, different order, but it's the same outcomes that are listed on our tool in the example. All right. So for each one of these, we want yeah, there's a slight difference here. I think we've got an increased benefits. Oh, we just changed the name of it a little bit. So currently employed and increased benefits. So I'm going to take this first one, this employed full-time, as the example because it has a full example and some of the others are abbreviated. So in this first example, for full-time, in the tool right now, it says 40K. For illustrative purposes in the calculator, we set it to 50. That may be a more realistic value. That's part of what this group will determine moving forward. However, what we put in this average outcome value, this is changeable by the user. All right, so what we're really doing here is setting in a recommended value. All right, and the way that we come up with that value is that we are adding together all of these various components that we see as valuable. This is the actual social return that we see on the investment. So when someone completes this program with this outcome of employed full-time, we would expect on average to see a 40 or 50K value to that outcome. All right, and we break that down. We don't just pull that out of the air. We say, no, we recognize that these are the numbers that add up to that value. Now, it doesn't need to be a nice clean number like 50,000, right? It may look something more like 48.5 or something like that, right? But whatever it is that you determine the value of the outcome to be, that you would put down the various components in the outcome value breakdown, right? And this, again, like I mentioned at the top of the call, this is not a super sophisticated spreadsheet. It doesn't do a lot of the math for you. You'll see why here in a moment. It would just make it really difficult to try to get all those fields going. What was a lot easier is to just say, hey, generate a list of the items that add up to the outcome value and just try to make sure, well, not try, really make sure that they add up, that the breakdown makes sense. Okay, as you can see on the employed part-time and paid internship, those have different values associated with them, and then they'll have different breakdowns. So in these examples, we didn't go through the exercise of actually filling out all of these because they would be specific to the outcome. But we would say, you know, part of that would be 20,000 in wages, and then there's another 5,000 that we're adding to that based on maybe some of the other stuff that would qualify as valuable to a part-time employed person. Okay. So I'll show where to add this in just a moment, but this is the example for that first section. In the calculator, you know, you can add all of the outcomes that you have demonstrated. These are simply the options, right? We just want to we want to see this list for this category. We want to see this grow, right? In ways that make good sense, that are common areas. The group is going to help prevent duplication or identify where we might want to merge a couple or something like that. As we start to get down the line here, and filling in a lot of options, that will be the role of this service group to help kind of massage that and provide some feedback on how things are loaded into this tool. Okay. All right, do this one. And so you can see here, like these generate these sample values. So really what we're looking for is giving a name to the outcome, giving a value to the outcome, and then we'll load those into the system. If I'm a user and I don't agree with that value, that's okay. I'll just come in and change it. I'll say, oh no, we wanted that to be 50. So I'll change it to 50 and it'll work in the calculator. Right. So this is a relatively low risk task that we have in generating these values, in that we can change them once they're in the calculator anyway. All right. What we don't really have much play over is what that outcome is called. Once it's pulled down into this download CSV, once you pull it into a spreadsheet, you can change the names of things. So if you've got some jargon that you use internally at your agency, you can change that later. Okay, so that's what it looks like for programs and program outcomes, but that's not all of what the calculator will do. In the lower right, we also have services that we perform in those programs. So those services are the things that chew down this budget, right? So I'll go ahead and add in a budget now because it's going to start to make sense here. We'll put $100,000 budget in there. And for grins, we'll say that there were 50 enrolled. Okay, so it'll start putting some numbers in. So when I click on add services, that opens up the other part of the calculator. And in here, you can see that we have a list of services. We got a good list of services. These services relate to employment and training, right? If I were to add weatherization, that adds another whole section, and you would have your own services for weatherization, right? So this one is just looking at employment and training. So if I'm looking at employment and training, I see in my example here that I've got dress for success, job placement, job search, and resume development. These are a handful of services that may apply to employment and training. So we use that as an example here, and then give it a rough budget hit. You know, how in a budget expense, how much does each service cost, right? And when I could, let's do dress for success class. There we go. So that's the first one. We can see that the budget is now red because that's doing some calculator stuff. Let's say what we put in the budget for this particular one, we'll divide it up evenly. We'll say 25,000 was put into this one. I'm just doing this arbitrarily because it'll help the demonstration. So in this case, our budget's here for the dress for success. And remember, we've got these outcomes, right, that are available. So maybe we say that we've got a part-time employed, and that shows up in here because we've identified the value of it, but now we're looking at how many people went through the program, right? How much did it cost us to go through? So if I have a total of 50 clients enrolled, I divided this into 4. That was smart. So in this case, maybe I've got 12 folks enrolled in here. And then how many achieved the outcome? If I've got 12 that enrolled, maybe I only have 6 that achieved the outcome. Okay, so those are important numbers. Those will come up later. But it's possible that maybe we've got more than one thing going on. In our example, we've got job placement that's also happening. So we'll put in job placement. And my intent here isn't really to show you how the calculator works. We've got other videos that show you how the calculator works and kind of its functionality, and why all these numbers turn red and green. But basically, they need to line up. They need to add up to the same amount. Oops. So I've got maybe, and this doesn't need to add up to 50, but it should add up to at least 50, if that makes sense. So if you've got more than one person enrolled in a program, for instance, you may have some duplication there. But I'll keep it relatively clean for this one. In this case, maybe there's a paid apprenticeship. Maybe that's a job placement program is getting people into apprenticeships. And the outcome value that you see in here was already established up here, right? So that's where it comes in again. It just shows you there. What we see on the tool, on the input tool, is that we're trying to determine, and the calculator is doing this on the back end. Okay, we're trying to determine how much each of these cost to run. So this is and this isn't a per user, this is a whole budget. So if you want to put the whole budget together, and in theory, what would happen is what, 35. So if that was my real budget, what I would put up here is 35, 35,000. And then that would be all four of these programs, right? So in here, that's why we include these recommended amounts, because they can help later in terms of identifying how much these things cost and doing the calculations. So what we'll put in for the entry fields is that if I had Dress for Success, then we say it costs us $5,000 to run that program, to staff it, to advertise it, to provide overhead, all of the little bits that you peel off for well, overhead, all of the administrative costs. So all of that kind of rolls up into one number, for that program. And that's how much you're going to budget for the program. And you would enter that there. So those are two service areas, but then there's this third service area. So what you see here is that you've got job training, but hey, where's the number, right? Well, in this case, what we're trying to do is account for referral services. So these are no cost to the agency services that may generate outcomes, right? So we may want to continue to list additional services that don't have a budget associated, but we do count them, right? And they are valuable, and they do provide a return based on the activity that happens. So these additional referral services show up in the services area. So like you see job trainings here. There's on the job training, right? Well, we don't run the job. The job is on site. So we've got this on the job training, and perhaps the on the job training really doesn't cost us anything. Okay. But the outcomes could be there. I mean, if you can generate a number or identify an outcome of the referral, that would be interesting. If there was a value associated to that outcome, it may or may not happen that way, so just consider all of the referral services that are available for that program and list them on the side. Okay. All right. I went through an awful lot and I paraphrased a lot of what's going on here, but basically what we're going to do now is take a look at how we would enter one. All right. But essentially what you're going to do here is for each service, you'll go to, excuse me, not for service, for each program. When you take a look at a program, you'll be adding services and outcomes to it. Okay. So when I want to add a program, all right, and it'll look something like this when I add it. When I add the program, I first have a blank page, right? And then this gives me an opportunity to enter in all of those items. The important thing to note is that these green bars here kind of divide what speaks to what. So these rows are tied together, but they are not necessarily connected to these two, right? So, but these are connected together, and then these are standalone. So if I wanted to put in a new program, let's call it housing. Okay, that'll be good because I do not think we have that yet. Yeah, so let's say we've got a housing program, and one of the outcomes may be let's see here. Transition housing. That happens a lot. All right. And then for the transition housing, we would identify in the breakdown, like what's the value of having transition housing. So that would be maybe perhaps the average cost of the rent in the area. If there is an actual value associated with it, you can put that in there in transition housing. Um, and if there are any additional like ancillary items that a person's alleviated from, then you may include those values as well. And this is where things get a little interesting. So you start to brainstorm like what is included in the value to the client when they achieve the outcome of receiving transitional housing, or maybe a housing voucher. Housing voucher could be the voucher uh, value itself, but there may be some other items associated with achieving that housing voucher, receiving the housing voucher, using the housing voucher, that may have additional impact that you want to include as valuable to the community in dollars and cents. Okay, so once you have those items that you would include, like you see, and I'm going to zip over to the instructions. So like you see here in employment, where you've got some of these extra pieces, reduced subsidies, for instance, and payment of tax, well, reduced subsidies for sure, is included in that. And so you would factor that in. If you're coming off of other services, that's a value back to the community because it's dollars that could go back into use somewhere else, right? Um, so once you've got all of those items, you add them all up, that gives you your average outcome value. And then we, on the back end, will take that information and load it into the calculator, and it will become an additional program on, in addition to employment and training and weatherization, maybe now we've got a housing, and under the housing, we've got a transitional housing outcome, or is an outcome that happens or received, moved into transitional housing. The value here becomes the outcome value. And again, it's a guess. It's an average. But we're trying to be as close as we can to the value. And then this, in the end, will serve as a how we came up with that number as an appendix that we can include later. So we want to capture this now because we don't want to go back and have to figure out what the what the makeup of all these values were, like where that number came from. That's where we put it, very simply. Okay, and then for this program, I may also have, well, I'm going to have services because the program's going to cost. So we do something, and maybe one service, it may be multiple services that we offer. But we'll put in that service, and then how much does that cost for the budget period, right? Is probably a year, So for that service, we'll enter in the direct service for housing, and then what our budget is for that service, the overall budget. Right? Again, not individual, overall budget for the period. And then if there are any referral services, we would enter them in the referral services column. Okay, pretty straightforward. All right. I suppose the first or last thing that I would recommend for each of these programs is to rename the tab with the program name. As you see on the instructions, that program column, we just enter the program once and let it go. All right. You don't have to re-enter it over and over. Everything else is unique. So in the programs column, in this case, I would take housing, and then I would come down here and double click and type in housing, and that becomes the name of the program. And I know that tab is for that, right? Likewise with the remaining tabs, if you need more tabs, you can copy a tab. It will copy over the formatting. Okay. Okay. Once you have a template filled in, or if you've got some stuff and you're ready to submit it to for review by the group, then you would send it to the group email. That's sroi.sg. Put it in the chat here. So that email address that you see in the chat there, the sroi.sg@calcappa.org, you just submit this to that address, and I'll provide additional instructions on the follow-up to this call. But we want to keep this a very simple process. And once we have one or more of these submitted, then at the next session with the group, we'll look through them, kind of review them, can intellectually argue their merits, and then at that point, we'll take it and load the information into the calculator on the back end. Right. But that way we've gotten a few sets of eyes on what it is that we're putting into the calculator before it goes live. And then we'll meet the task of filling in a lot more programs and services that we offer. And that's the goal. The main goal is to twofold. One is to increase the number of options that are in here, but number two is to make sure that they're relevant and as accurate as we can make them. Okay. All right. At the risk of having over-explained a pretty simple tool, what questions do you have about the entry tool that we've got here to submit for new programs and services? And then any other general questions about participating in the service group? I'll go ahead and pull this down for now. Okay. All right. So how do you feel about the task ahead of you? Any concerns about filling in additional programs or services? Would you prefer to do one at a time, like one program at a time, see if that's correct, and then move on to others? Or what do you feel would be the best strategy for your situation individually?
Hi, Lawrence. This is Julie with SETA.
Hey, Julie.
What I'm looking at is probably one program at a time
All right. Yeah, that's great.
because our programs are so large that, yeah, it'll take some time to just do one.
Yeah, and Julie, I think it's pretty fair too for large programs to start small and then we can expand it.
Okay.
And I think that's pretty fair. So yeah, I don't want this to be a high stress task, but we do want to be accurate. That's
Okay, maybe I can do a discretionary grant too, that
all right,
just to
cool.
get it started.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Louisa, how are you feeling? You can post in the chat.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Perfect. Awesome. I got my mic to work. So my question is with regards to timelines. I do want to definitely participate in this and really roll through. We have over 16 programs, so our agency is pretty large in that aspect, right? So there's a lot of, Roma that's also tied to all of this with regard, with the outcomes and the dollar value attached to each of these outcomes. So I definitely am with Julie on that one, where I think with it's going to be a gradual rollout. I think it's good to, at least for us, we're probably going to have to spearhead one of our bigger programs that brings in more clients is what I'm anticipating to kind of begin with, and then just start adding more programs to this list. But I did want to touch base with the team to see what the timeline looks like for submission, because I know you did drop that link in or the email address in the chat, but I think it's always beneficial, to have some rough timelines on when we're trying to get this information. That way, us on the CapK side as well can ensure that we prioritize things accordingly.
Yeah, that's understandable. This is one of those projects that's like the sooner the better, but there's not a stressor. There's no hard deadline on us. And except for money. So we all know about when the dollars run out for funding particular things, right? So this project is kind of set up in the scope of our regional work, our regional performance innovation consortium. So that our budget cycle for that goes till the end of September. So we're probably looking for as much as we can accomplish by the end of September to report for this tool. That said, it's open-ended, right? There's no like, we're not going to stop adding to the tool. We just want to get as much as we can in there in the time allowed. And we've got another, I don't know, I think there's 4 other agencies that just couldn't participate today, and others that will join in to help contribute. I don't know that we'll necessarily have to do all of our programs, because we've got other agencies that may run similar programs. We may just want to be like adding a few of the outcomes that we see and calculate that may not be existing, or add services to to the program categories, because maybe our agency operates some services that others don't. All right. So there's some flexibility in that as we move forward. To answer your question, though, I expect that this group will probably come together again next month this time, and then we'll test the water and see how frequently we want to set aside time to meet. But in the interim, we have the opportunity to use email. Asynchronous is probably a lot easier for people's schedules to do this kind of work. So there's a good chance that we'll just ask that folks submit. We'll share what's submitted when it's appropriate. That next meeting will be a good time for us to review what has been submitted so far, get an idea of what our task will be in order to sort of clean up the entries and then make them ready to add to the calculator, right? CalCAPA will worry about adding it to the calculator. What we want is just make sure that what we're adding makes sense to you, you know? Does that answer your question, Luisa? I feel like I'm dancing around it, but
No, that definitely answered the question. Thank you. I appreciate that.
okay, cool.
So Lawrence, this is Julie. If I'm hearing you right, so we're filling out the spreadsheet, not necessarily the calculator.
Yeah, the calculator is always available. You can tinker with that today. Especially if you want to go in and remind yourself exactly what it is, those numbers.
Right, we're doing.
Right.
Okay.
And that can be helpful. Oh, that's what I wanted to provide everybody on the call. And this is the user guide. I'm going to put it in the chat here, but in the near future, there will be a link directly on the calculator page that'll give access to this document. And the document that you see, the user guide, is a step-by-step sampling of how to use the calculator. So if you forget, it's really good. It's very detailed, more so than what I just went over in a quick overview on how these things work, right? And that aligns that document, that how-to document, aligns with that entry tool and is referenced in the entry tool, right? So in these instructions that you'll see on the instruction tab, I think in a couple of spots it says to look in the guide for an example of this, that, or the other. It's a pretty good guide. It's written by the same person who wrote the Roma book, or co-wrote it. So there you go. Okay. Anything else? Or did that answer your question?
Yeah, that helped. So thank you.
Okay. All right. Real good. Okay. Well, then I would say for us, and then for those that are watching the recording, I'll send out an invitation for a meeting essentially same time next month, ish. And we'll have that as sort of a deadline to get as much entered as we can. If we could at least get one new program that you have with, I don't know, 3 or more outcomes, that would be great, right? Just little baby steps. If you can do more than that, that's wonderful, right? You might get on a roll. Just start loading it up. I'm happy with that. Yeah. But if you can do one, get a couple of the outcomes that you expect, at least 1 or 2 services that you perform for that program, and then the budget that's associated with it, and we'll see where it goes from there. Okay. Is that good? Is a month too long, or is that a reasonable time for you all?
That definitely works for me. Thank you.
Okay. And like I said, that email address is always going. So don't don't feel like you have to wait to get a reply. Like I'm always monitoring that. You could send something tomorrow and I would look at it and we can talk about it. Like through the group. Okay. So I'll keep that as a reminder too. I'll try to communicate with the group periodically. This is a little reminder. If your day is like mine, it's littered with all sorts of priorities, and this kind of a thing would fall off my list pretty fast. I very much appreciate the attention that you will supply to filling in a little bit of that spreadsheet, and that combines it. We're building this all into a universal tool. This isn't a one agency or even one state. Like after we're finished here, we're moving on. Right. So we want to expand this as widely as we can in the network. This is a great way of building it out for us. All right. Any other questions about the task at hand? Okay, real good. Well, if you think of something, you can email me or email the group, and we'll see you next month.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.